Picture this. A man stands in the middle of a crowded city street. Around him, people hurry with shopping bags in both hands, checking their phones, rushing from one obligation to the next. Billboards flash promises of more success, more beauty, more approval. The noise is endless, the pace exhausting. Yet in the midst of it all, he is still. He carries little. He needs even less. Most of us are trained to ask only one question: how can I get more? More money, more recognition, more security. We chase these things as if they hold the secret to freedom. But Henry David Thoreau turned the question upside down. He asked instead, how can I need less? Thoreau's answer was radical because it revealed a truth most of us are afraid to face. Freedom does not begin when you finally have enough. It begins when you realize you already do. Clarity does not come from adding more layers to life. It comes from stripping them away until what remains is real. So the question is not how much you can gain, but how much you can let go. And the man who dares to ask that question discovers a kind of wealth the world cannot touch. From the moment we are old enough to understand words, the world whispers a single story into our ears. If you want to be happy, you need more. More toys as a child, more grades as a student, more money as an adult. And when you finally have these things, the story changes again. Now you need a bigger house, a faster car, a shinier title, a longer list of accomplishments. The story never ends because it was never designed to. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. The more options we collect, the more restless we become. Every new purchase is supposed to bring relief, but instead it opens the door to comparison. If you have 5 shirts, you wonder which looks best. If you own 50, you wonder if you are behind on the newest style. What was meant to satisfy becomes a source of stress. And still, society pushes the narrative forward. The market thrives on your sense of lack. Advertising does not sell products, it sells dissatisfaction. It whispers that you are falling behind, that you are not successful enough, not attractive enough, not respected enough. And so you work harder, spend more, and accumulate things that quietly begin to own you. Because that is the dark twist in this story. The more you have, the more you must protect. The more you chase, the more you fear losing. And what began as freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to achieve, turns into its opposite. A man chained not by scarcity, but by abundance. Think about it. The man with nothing to prove can walk lightly. He is not haunted by the fear of slipping from his pedestal. But the man who has built his identity on possessions and titles carries them like armor, heavy, restrictive, exhausting. The very things he believed would liberate him now confine him. And yet, in quiet moments, a question surfaces. If more is the path to happiness, why do those with the most often feel the least at peace? Why do so many who reach the peak of success confess to emptiness? Why does the hunger never stop? The truth is simple, though rarely admitted. More is not designed to fulfill you. It is designed to keep you running. A moving target ensures the chase never ends. And the more you believe in the promise of more, the less you notice the toll it takes on your clarity, your freedom, your soul. This is the trap, a world that convinces you to measure your life by accumulation, while hiding the fact that accumulation has no finish line. A game where you are always one step behind, no matter how much you win. Thoreau saw through this illusion. He recognized that the cost of needing more was nothing less than life itself. Time traded for possessions, presence traded for appearances, freedom traded for comfort. And he chose differently, which leads us to the question he lived, not just asked. What if the secret is not to collect more, but to learn how to need less? In the summer of 1845, Henry David Thoreau left behind the noise of Concord, Massachusetts, and walked 2 miles into the woods. On the edge of Walden Pond, he built a cabin with his own hands. It was a single room, rough timber and stone, nothing anyone would envy. A bed, a chair, a desk, a small fireplace. By society's standards, it was a life stripped bare. But for Thoreau, it was a deliberate act of wealth. He was not running away from the world. He was running toward a deeper encounter with it. He looked around at his fellow citizens, working endless hours to pay for houses, filled with things they scarcely used, rushing from task to task, trapped by obligations that multiplied with every possession. And he asked a dangerous question. What if the cost of this pursuit was greater than its reward? At Walden, he sought to test another way of living. He grew beans in a small field. He fetched water from the pond. He kept careful accounts of every expense, showing that a man could live on a fraction of what society claimed was necessary. But beyond the numbers, what he gained was immeasurable. He discovered that life becomes richer when it is not burdened with excess. His days were filled with long walks in the woods, listening to the calls of birds, watching the ice break on the pond, tracing the slow turn of seasons. These were not idle hours, they were hours of attention. Thoreau believed that in simplicity, the mind wakes up. The less he carried, the more clearly he could see. He wrote, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone." To most, that sounded like madness. To Thoreau, it was liberation. He redefined wealth not as accumulation, but as freedom. Freedom from debt. Freedom from social comparison. Freedom from the constant anxiety of needing to keep up. Critics mocked him, accusing him of play-acting poverty, of shirking responsibility, but they missed the point. Thoreau did not advocate misery. He was not glorifying lack. He was demonstrating sufficiency, the art of knowing when enough is enough. He was showing that a man with little, if it is the right little, may live more abundantly than a man with much. This was not asceticism for its own sake. It was an experiment in clarity. He wanted to prove that by stepping outside the machinery of endless want, you could rediscover the essence of life. Reflection, creativity, communion with nature, and the courage to think for yourself. And that is why Walden endures. The cabin is gone, but the idea remains. In a world that keeps telling you to add more, Thoreau reminds you that subtraction can be the greater power. By needing less, he found space to hear his own soul, and that blueprint is still here, waiting for anyone willing to try. Thoreau may have lived in the 19th century, but modern science has only confirmed what he intuited in the woods of Walden. He believed that life became clearer when stripped to its essentials. Today, psychologists, neuroscientists, and sociologists are proving him right. Start with the mind. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called decision fatigue. Each choice we face drains a small measure of mental energy. A closet crammed with clothes, a phone buzzing with endless notifications, a schedule filled with back-to-back obligations, each adds invisible weight to the brain. Over time, the result is exhaustion, irritability, poor judgment. When you simplify, when you reduce options, you don't just save time. You reclaim cognitive energy. Clarity expands because your mind is no longer clouded by trivial choices. Neuroscience goes further. Studies show that minimalism reduces activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain associated with stress and anxiety. A tidy environment lowers cortisol levels, fewer possessions, fewer distractions, less stimulation, all free the nervous system from constant overload. What Thoreau felt in his cabin by the pond, science now measures in brain scans and hormone levels. Needing less literally calms the body. Sociologists point to another effect. People with lower material needs display higher resilience during economic downturns. When the financial system shakes, those who have built their lives on constant consumption face collapse. But those who require little adapt more easily. They bend instead of breaking. In a volatile world, needing less becomes not just a spiritual choice, but a survival strategy. Happiness research confirms the same lesson. Beyond a certain threshold, wealth and possessions add little to well-being. A larger house may excite briefly, but soon it becomes the new normal. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation, the treadmill that keeps you running but never arriving. Experiences, on the other hand, create lasting satisfaction, connection, creativity, mastery. These are the sources of durable joy, and all of them flourish when your life is not overrun by excess. Even consumer studies reveal the trap. People who spend money on status goods often report lower life satisfaction than those who spend on simple pleasures or invest in relationships. Why? Because status is always relative. The more you chase it, the more fragile it becomes. One promotion, one neighbor's new car, one friend's success can shatter the illusion. By contrast, the man who needs less is untouchable. He carries his wealth within. Science, then, gives language to what Thoreau embodied. Decision fatigue explains why his simplicity brought clarity. Cortisol levels explain why his solitude brought peace. Resilience studies explain why his voluntary poverty gave him strength. And happiness research explains why his life, though sparse, was abundant. The lesson is not that possessions are evil. It is that possessions are deceptive. They promise ease but demand maintenance. They promise status but create comparison. They promise freedom but bind you tighter to the wheel. By needing less, you reduce these hidden costs. You free the mind, calm the body, strengthen resilience, and open the door to genuine fulfillment. This is the science behind simplicity. It is not just philosophy. It is not just Thoreau's intuition. It is measurable, repeatable, undeniable. To need less is not to live in lack. It is to align your life with the way the human mind and body truly flourish. Thoreau did not claim to have all the answers. What he offered was a different way of seeing. His time at Walden distilled into a simple blueprint, a set of principles that anyone can test for themselves. They are not rigid rules. They are invitations to step out of the noise and rediscover what life is made of when we stop trying to carry so much. The first principle is to redefine your needs. Most of us never pause long enough to ask what is truly necessary. We inherit our sense of need from television commercials, from neighbors, from the silent pressure of social comparison. Over time, wants become dressed as needs, and we run after them as if our survival depended on keeping up. Thoreau refused to play along. In the woods, he tested the difference between what sustained life and what only cluttered it. Food, shelter, warmth, and a sense of meaning were enough. Beyond that, most of what society called necessary was a disguise for insecurity or habit. He discovered that once you strip life to its essentials, everything else is optional. This realization does not shrink your life, it sharpens it. Each false need abandoned is one less chain to carry. Each real need recognized is a solid stone on which you can build. The second principle is to practice voluntary simplicity. There is a world of difference between forced poverty and chosen simplicity. One is misery, the other is power. Thoreau did not glorify lack for its own sake. He chose to limit himself so that he could be free. By growing beans, mending his clothes, and keeping his cabin bare, he proved that a man could live on less without feeling less alive. In fact, he felt more awake than ever. Voluntary simplicity is not about rejecting the world. It is about refusing to let the world own you. Each subscription you cancel, each habit of consumption you release, is an act of independence. It is saying, I will not let the marketplace define who I am. Simplicity creates space for what matters most, because every yes to another possession or obligation is a no to your time, your attention, your soul. Thoreau's choice was deliberate. He wanted to show that simplicity is not weakness, it is strength. The third principle is to shift from having to being. This idea was echoed later by the philosopher Erich Fromm, who distinguished between the mode of having and the mode of being. In the mode of having, life is measured by possessions, titles, and trophies. In the mode of being, life is measured by depth, creativity, connection, and inner growth. Thoreau lived fully in the second mode. He understood that joy found in objects fades quickly, but joy rooted in experience, in friendship, in creativity, lasts. A meal shared with a friend, a day spent in nature, an idea wrestled into words. These are riches no thief can steal and no market can devalue. When you shift from having to being, you stop asking, "What can I own?" and start asking, "How can I live?" It is a quieter question, but it leads to a louder life. Thoreau's cabin was poor in possessions, but rich in moments. And in those moments he found an abundance greater than any fortune. The fourth principle is to protect empty space. Thoreau understood that clarity cannot emerge in a life crowded with noise. Just as a room cluttered with objects suffocates the eye, a schedule cluttered with tasks suffocates the soul. He made room for solitude, for stillness, for silence. He cultivated emptiness not as a void, but as fertile ground. In the physical sense, a cabin with little furniture gave him peace. In the mental sense, hours without distraction gave him thought. In the social sense, choosing a few deep relationships over endless shallow ones gave him strength. Today, we call this minimalism, mindfulness, or digital detox. Thoreau simply called it living. The paradox is clear. When you strip away the unnecessary, what remains is not emptiness, but presence. What looks like less from the outside feels like more from within. Protecting empty space is not laziness. It is discipline. It is creating room for life itself to breathe. Taken together, these four principles form Thoreau's enduring blueprint. Redefine what you need, practice simplicity by choice, shift your focus from having to being, and guard the sacredness of empty space. None of these are abstract ideas. They are practices anyone can begin today, and they all point to the same conclusion. Freedom is not found in adding more, but in daring to live with less. Choosing to need less is never a neutral act. It unsettles people. It challenges the assumptions on which modern life is built. And because of that, it comes with a price. The first cost is misunderstanding. In a culture where ambition is measured by accumulation, a man who deliberately steps away from the race is easily branded a failure. Neighbors may shake their heads, wondering why you refuse opportunities. Friends may tease you for living small, as if simplicity were weakness. Families may quietly worry that you are falling behind. Thoreau himself endured this. His neighbors mocked his cabin, calling it childish or impractical, unable to see that he had chosen clarity over conformity. The second cost is inner friction. To need less means confronting the part of you that craves recognition. It means sitting in the quiet after saying no to what everyone else says yes to. At first, the silence can feel like absence. Doubts rise. Did I give up too much? Am I missing out? That discomfort is real, but it is also the sign that you are no longer running on borrowed values. You are beginning to live on your own. Yet the reward for paying this price is immense. The most obvious reward is freedom. The man who needs less cannot be owned. He does not live in fear of losing things because his happiness does not rest on them. He carries his security inside. That makes him harder to control, harder to manipulate, harder to break. Another reward is time. Every false need abandoned frees hours once spent chasing, earning, and maintaining. Those hours become available for reflection, for creation, for relationships that matter. Time is the currency of life, and needing less is how you buy it back. There is also clarity. A life stripped of excess makes decisions sharper. priorities come into focus. The fog of comparison lifts. You know what you stand for because you are no longer weighed down by everything you do not. And then comes resilience. When your needs are simple, you bend instead of break. Economic storms, social shifts, sudden losses, these strike hardest at those who have built their lives on fragile towers of more. The man who requires little adapts quickly because little is required to sustain him. This, in the end, is the trade. The price of needing less is being misunderstood, even judged. The reward is freedom, clarity, time, and strength. Thoreau's lesson was that the real cost is not in choosing simplicity. The real cost is in running endlessly after more and never arriving. Thoreau's cabin at Walden was built in the 19th century, but his blueprint speaks with even greater urgency today. We live in an age not of scarcity, but of excess. Screens blink day and night. Advertisements follow us into our homes, and the pace of consumption outstrips our ability to keep up. If Thoreau saw people rushing in his time, what would he say about ours? The world today rewards noise. It celebrates speed, constant updates, and perpetual connection. Yet beneath the glow of digital abundance, many feel emptier than ever. Anxiety and burnout rise with each passing year. The average person checks a phone hundreds of times a day. Entire lives are lived in comparison to carefully edited images of others. The promise is always more followers, more productivity, more stimulation. The result is exhaustion. In this world, the choice to need less becomes a form of quiet rebellion. A digital detox is not just a lifestyle trend. It is a declaration that your attention is yours. A slower pace is not laziness. It is resistance to a culture that mistakes busyness for value. Practicing mindfulness is not retreat. It is reclaiming the ability to live in a single moment without being pulled apart by 1,000 voices. The language has changed. Minimalism, slow living, sustainability, but the core idea is Thoreau's. Wealth is not the accumulation of more. It is the freedom of enough. Modern research shows that people who simplify their environments, reduce their digital noise, and cultivate deep rather than shallow connections report higher well-being. In other words, the same truths Thoreau lived by a pond still hold in the heart of the 21st century. The man who needs less today is not a hermit. He is not necessarily moving into the woods or abandoning society. He might live in a city apartment, run a business, raise a family, but what sets him apart is a refusal to let excess define him. He does not measure worth by the size of his house or the brand of his car. He measures it by clarity of mind, freedom of time, and depth of relationships. And so, in a world that tells us to add more at every turn, Thoreau's voice cuts through like a bell. Need less. Live deliberately. Protect the empty spaces where real life unfolds. What was once a cabin in the woods is now a blueprint for surviving a world that is always shouting for your attention. Thoreau ended his experiment at Walden after 2 years, but the lessons never ended. He proved that freedom does not wait at the far edge of accumulation. It begins the moment you decide to need less. That truth unsettled his neighbors then, and it unsettles us now because it asks us to turn against the script we have been handed since birth. The world insists that a good life is measured by more money, more recognition, more possessions. But Thoreau's life whispers another possibility. The man who knows how to need less discovers a form of wealth that cannot be lost, stolen, or inflated away. He discovers time, clarity, and peace. He discovers himself. Thoreau once wrote, "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone." It is a line that reads like a challenge. What if true wealth is not what you hold tightly, but what you can release without fear? What if strength is not carrying more, but carrying only what matters? So the question falls to us. What can you let go of today? One obligation, one possession, one false need. Just enough to feel the weight lift. Just enough to hear your own voice again. Perhaps that is where freedom begins. Not in the endless pursuit of more, but in the quiet art of needing less.